Let's now dive into finding your BHAG. What is a BHAG? The big, hairy, audacious goal. I wish I could tell you I came up with it, but it's not me. This comes from Jim Collins from a very long time ago. Jim Collins, all of you know who he is. He wrote Good to Great, Built to Last. When he studied some of the best companies in the world, he discovered that they all had a very clear long-term vision that was non-financial that drove all of the team towards that common goal. It was like the North Star of the organization, and it is something that's meant to be kept a little bit secret, okay? When you're thinking long-term, Jim Collins was talking 10 to 25 years. Now you're gonna need to make a decision because it's a challenging thing to look ahead that far. A lot of entrepreneurs really struggle with thinking of a concept that far into the future. So if you're someone who's incredibly visionary, you can really look at 25 years. If you're someone who's a little more down to earth and feels that 10 years makes more sense, look at 10 years. But as I mentioned in the first part of this video, you need to stay away from financial goals. We see this all the time, and in the Entrepreneurs Organization specifically, we're gonna hear a lot of people talk about $100 million. This is just a magic number that we see all the time that's spoken about, that people aim towards. And that's fine, you're allowed and you should have financial goals as an entrepreneur, but that is not gonna motivate your team. Think about telling your team 50 million, 100 million, 500 million, $1 billion. What does it matter to that team member? At the end of the day, that number is very random for them. So you have to give them a very specific goal that's gonna drive the right behaviors in your organization. So let's look at some of the examples of how to do this. Microsoft has one of the most famous BHAGs in history, a computer in every home. Right? When Bill Gates came out with Microsoft, he had a vision. At that point, no one had computers at home. He knew there would be a computer in every home. He knew he'd be not only building these computers, but building the software that was going to go into all of these computers. So by attaining that goal, he knew that he would absolutely hit his BHAG and make a massive impact in the world. Look at Ford, democratized the automobile. He literally wanted to take horses and turn those into cars. It's just a very lofty goal, something that's just wild and that he did accomplish, and they did accomplish as an organization. What are the key things to remember when you're building a big, hairy, audacious goal? Number one, which gets missed a lot, it must be measurable. Please stop coming up with BHAGs that are things such as the leader in my industry, the best, the biggest. These are not measurable. You won't actually be able to tell if you're leading an industry. It's not something that can be measured. I often hear people say, well, there's a consumer survey. Let's be honest with ourselves. That consumer survey is not going to give you any information. So you need to get more specific. You need to make sure that that goal is absolutely measurable. Number two, it has to be a little impossible. So you got to have people around the table who really look at this and say to themselves, I don't think we could accomplish that. If you actually say that sentence, I don't think we can accomplish that, that means your BHAG is probably on track to being the right one. Okay, so you should be saying, wow, that feels impossible. Jim Collins explained to us a BHAG is anywhere between 50 and 70% possible. So if it's a little bit impossible, it means you're doing it the right way. So that's something that you need to consider as well. And then number three, which would be another good thing to remember, it should be something that brings your team to a whole new stratosphere. It means that your existing team probably cannot accomplish this BHAG today, because if it's easy for them to accomplish, that means it's not a BHAG, right? It's not a big, hairy, audacious goal. It might just be a goal. So you have to consider that it's going to be something that's going to take your team to a whole new level. You might need to add new people to the table when you do it. So there's a lot of different ways of thinking about this. I'm going to give you one more BHAG from a client as an example that's been just incredible, that's really impressed me, is that they came up with this idea where they were going to be selling their pastries. And you think pastries, how can you come up with a BHAG around that? Is there going to be a number of pastries? But what they realized is that for their pastries, every bite is a bite of joy, because the client eats it and it's just this joy that they're trying to bring to the person. Let's not talk about the health benefits or lack of benefits, but the joy that comes from it is pretty incredible. They came up and said, you know what, we want to have 50 million bites of joy into the world by 2035. So you think about that, it is a number, and they've calculated the number, but it's really all about the bites of joy going out there. So get creative with your BHAG. Remember what it needs to be, measurable before everything else. And when you come up with that North Star, once again, make sure your team is on board and believing in it and driving the right behaviors.